Welcome, Tom, to the Matrix Wissen Treffen in Lindenfeld 2024. It's the third or the fourth time that we're here now. The fourth, and we're so happy to have you here, answering all our questions and helping us understanding the world.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here. Continuing work that Oliver started, I think is important. So
Yes.
I'm glad all of you have kind of come together and stuck together in order to keep this going. Oliver had a rather amazing website, and it wasn't just about Tom Campbell. It was about a lot of very interesting uh, things, people.
Okay, the first question is, Dear Tom Campbell, I have a question about optimizing community living. From your perspective, how can living in a community be optimized to promote growth, harmony, and well being among its members? Is there anything else you can say about the topic of living with other people? Thanks for your insights. So, I think this question is about not living with your family, but living in a community housing or in a space with lots of people that try
Well,
to promote growth. Yeah.
the same answer would occur whether it was your family or friends or just neighbors, and that is, living with other people is where the rubber meets the road in personal growth. That's where you're most challenged. That's where your greatest opportunities lie for personal growth, is you connecting deeply with other people, or even superficially in a neighborhood. Your connection with others is not only part of your human need to connect with other people, but it's where the learning mostly takes place. So it's important to pay attention to that. So that would be the first thing. Realize that living with other people is a key uh, learning situation. Now, how do you go about learning? Well, the idea is to interact with those people positively, with no negative interaction. Now, negative interaction could be somebody gets angry, somebody gets their feelings hurt, somebody gets upset, somebody feels bad about the relationships or the connections or the group or the way the group is acting or going or whatever. So all those things are negative, but also negative are those who would try to control the group, those who want the group to do things the right way, which of course is their way. Each person's preferred way of doing things, always in their own minds, is the right way, the way it should be done. And some people tend to get a little forceful with things being done the right way, and a little forceful in encouraging others to agree with them. So there's negativity comes in all shapes and sizes. It's not just anger or obvious negativity. It may be in a desire to control, and that desire to control may actually appear to the individual as a desire to help. Oh, here, let me take charge. Let me help straighten this out. Let me help everybody get through this by sharing with what it is they all need to do. That sort of a thing. So all of those things are things to watch out for and to learn. So one, groups are important, whether they're significant others, your children, your parents, or just your neighbors and your friends. Those relationships are important, and you should make an effort to learn whatever you can from them. You should make an effort to not let your fears interfere with those relationships. When you get more than 3 or 4 people together, there's bound to be conflicts. Some people want to go right, other people want to go left. Some people want to talk about this, others want to talk about that. There's always conflicts. How do you resolve those conflicts? How important is it that it go, this way instead of that way in the big picture? So look at the big picture. The big picture would be this group and all of its people How important is it that certain things be done a certain way, a week from now or 2 weeks from now or a month from now? So very important, dealing with others. So how do you do it? Well, the same answer is for how you do everything good in MBT, and that is you get rid of your fear. You interact with others with caring and with sharing, with love, with compassion. You do not try to control other people's free wills. You let them alone. You let them be who they are. You can help if asked. If not asked, probably better to not help unless you just want to offer that, but don't push. Don't try to lecture. Don't try to explain. Just let people figure it out on their own, because that's the only way they will learn. We learn very little except through our own observations. The things we learn in a classroom, in a lecture, are not things that have to do with relationship. They're facts. Relationships are all on the intuitive side. You don't live a relationship from your intellect. Well, many people do live their relationships through their intellect, but that becomes a problem. In the relationship, you need to connect with other people intuitively, connect with their feelings, connect with them as individuals, connect with their with their fears, their struggles, where they are in their evolutionary process. See where you can be helpful, and for the most part, you just have to let them go on their own if you don't find some place to be helpful. So that's what it should do. It's more of a personal thing. It's not what you can do to the group that'll make that group work better. You can't really do much of anything to a group. The group just is, and it will produce its own leaders. It will produce its own action officers, people that actually get things done. Most of the people will just talk and share, but there'll be a few people who will volunteer to, I'll get this done, and I'll get that done. And there are people that will rise to the top, and you should just let that be how it is. And if there's competition for those positions, that needs to be friendly, and it needs to kind of revert to what the group likes, what the group wants. So sometimes you can just take a break and say, well, how many people want to do this, and how many would rather do that, if there's some sort of conflict that shows up. But I suspect in a group like you have, there's probably not a lot of conflict. This is probably a very easy group to work with that you have. Everybody's trying real hard to grow up and learn and understand the nature of reality here. So the question, how do you optimize it? Optimize yourself. That's the short answer. Optimize yourself. And when you optimize yourself, you'll automatically optimize your interaction with the group.
Dear Mr. Campbell, my name is. It's a great honor for me to meet you over the internet. I am the daughter of. Maybe you remember her. She has brought you a big cake in Stuttgart. I just want to say that I am really excited to read your book, My Big Toe, that I have listened so much positive feedback about from the people here. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm glad that you're here. I think it's wonderful that people bring their children, get their children interested, and sometimes their parents. It's good that we get our families interested, because as you go down this path, it'll change you. You'll become a different person. And it's nice if that growth is shared among your friends and your family. That will tend to lubricate connections. So very good. Kudos to your mother for sharing with you and helping get you involved. That'll make the relationship between you much better.
Hello, Tom. I have a question. The question is, there are many Do you understand me?
Yes, I
Can
hear
you-
you and understand you just fine.
Okay. Homeopathy and other alternative technologies. The question is it just consciousness, or is there a more complex explanation of how and why some of these technologies and practices works? So the question is, there are many different forms, for example, of healing, like acupuncture or things like this. And my question is in our PMR rule set, which defines how these methods work, or is it only consciousness how they work? Maybe,
Yeah.
or let's say, our believing that this works. Oh,
Yeah, I'd say that if you're talking about alternative medicine outside the normal, medicine that your doctors and surgeons and so on bring to you, I'd say that the vast majority of it is just based on consciousness. The processes that are going on are what I call tools. They're things that help the practitioners focus their intent on very specific things. So that doesn't necessarily mean that that's 100%, but a large percentage of it is consciousness is really the key thing that's healing or that's changing things in those other modalities. The techniques, the processes, the physical things you go through are just there to make it more credible, to answer the question of, well, how does this work? Well, it works because when I place the crystal, that's purple over here, and I place one that's yellow over there, the energies combine, and so people come up with all sorts of explanations. And once somebody has an explanation, they can say, "Oh, okay," and kind of relax and let it happen. But if it's something that they can't understand, doesn't have physical process, oh, I just use my mind to modify the probabilities in the larger consciousness system to make you healthy, then most people will reject that as a possibility. And therefore, its success will only be limited to a very small audience that actually understands what you're saying when you say those words. Whereas if you do something physical, everybody can understand that. So that's why most of the healing modalities have some kind of physical process that they go through. But that physical process is their interface to the patient more than anything else, and a way of focusing their own intent on what they are trying to achieve.
but is there a difference between alternative medicine and the normal medicine? Or is this always the same? But only the difference is the normal medicine, perhaps more people believe than in the other medicine. And the next question would be, how would it work by children or people like, or by animals and things like this? Because, yeah.
Well, the normal medicine has some mechanics with it. If you set a broken arm, that's obviously mechanical. You pull it out the bone, you set the ends so that they match. You push it together, you put it in a cast so that it can't move, so it has to stay there until it heals. So you can see that the process has value. That's not just intent. And so it is with many of our medical processes. But I would guess that, again, a pretty significant percentage of them, maybe over 50%, most of the healing is probably done in the same way with the mind, with the intention. The medicines that are given are often not the thing that is effective, although they're not allowed to sell those medicines until they show that they can produce effects better than the placebo effect.
Mm-hmm.
So that would show that the medicine has to have some value greater than the placebo effect. But many of medicines these days have a hard time getting across that barrier. They have a real hard time doing better than the placebo effect. So what happens is the big drug companies take those medicines to a culture that is more naive. And now the placebo effect works very strongly there. So they get their medicine approved in that venue, and then it's approved for the whole world. Since science believes that anything you do in any place, that same science will hold everywhere, and they think they're doing science. So, so in as much as the medicine is honestly a significant amount better than the placebo effect, then probably the medicine's actually doing something physical. It has to do with the rule set. In as much as it marginally surpasses, the placebo effect, or only can pass it in a naive population, then it probably means that the medicine doesn't really have much value. It's mostly placebo effect that's working. So our normal medicine is some of the medicines have clear effects that are important and significant, like antibiotics, and others not so much. Others are, medicine goes through fashions. Certain medicines become fashionable, and they get prescribed a whole lot, and then they go out of fashion, and we kind of wonder why something that was important 5 or 6 years ago is no longer important anymore. Well, it's because it was part of groupthink. It was part of what was fashionable. Like I remember 10 years ago or so, the size of the I think it was red blood cells, or size of the lipids, were real important. If they were small, then that was a problem. If they were big, that was okay. And I know my physicians gave me a lot of trouble because whatever my size was, they were the wrong size. And they fussed at me and fussed at me. I needed to take this medicine. I need to take these drugs. And I told them to go pound sand. I wasn't interested in taking their drugs. And sure enough, about 5 years later, they stopped mentioning it. They just didn't test anymore. And I asked, I said, well, why not? Why aren't you testing for these sizes anymore? And they said, oh, well, we found that really didn't mean anything anyway. So we stopped doing it. So medicine is like that. It's got a lot of fads that pass through, and the group gets very excited about them, how wonderful they are, and then they find out later that they're not really very effective. So you have to be a little careful when you go to traditional medicine that what they're giving you is something that actually works. So do your own testing. One just kind of rule of thumb is that if you look at prescription medicine, often prescription medicine is just a stronger version of what you can get over the counter. You can get Tylenol over the counter, or you can get prescription Tylenol. And the difference is mostly a factor of 2. So if you'd rather not pay for the prescription, which is 4 or 5 times more expensive than over the counter, just take 2 of what you get over the counter. But it's easy enough to read the labels and figure out what those numbers are yourself to see. So I would say that everyone, when they go to doctors, whether they're traditional or whether they're outside of traditional, be very skeptical of everything you hear. Let them convince you that you need what they say you do, and then still be skeptical. Look it up, study it on the internet, ask other people who have similar problems. Make sure that you are an important part of the process of how it is you heal yourself. If you go to a doc and they say, oh, what you need is to take these pills 3 times a day, and you just say, okay, and you go back and you swallow the pills, you'll probably eventually end up with side effects and other symptoms for which they will give you new pills that will also have side effects and systems for which they will give you new pills. And pretty soon you're taking 20 or 30 pills every day, and you feel miserable. And that's because of the jumble of all the interactive side effects that you're getting. So be a little careful that medicine doesn't run you over by accident. They mean well, but they don't always understand what they're doing.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much.
I have a question coming back to the topic of how consciousness and medicine works, or other like technologies that work with consciousness. We had one of those things, you probably know them, like a little metal plate that claims that it energizes your water. Have you ever heard about something like that?
Oh, yes.
Yes, and I was thinking, okay, this people claim that it works, but is it because the people who bought the thing think that it works and that makes it work because now they put their intent in it? I paid money for it and the guy said it works, so now if I use it, it makes my water better quality, it makes me healthy and everything.
Mhm.
Or does this thing work because of the intent of the guy who sold it or the guy who invented it? And is it important that these people are still around and that they believe in their own technology, or um, doesn't does any of this matter? Is there a science behind how consciousness and these objects interact with each other? I hope
Yeah,
that
yeah,
made it clear.
indeed there is, and the answer is to all of the above. Yeah, so
Okay.
you listed a whole bunch of different things. It's all of the above. Yes, the inventor, the person who did it, the person who then decides to go into a business and sell it and market it, the people who buy it, all of those form a collective consciousness in support of that particular process. So, okay, you do something to the water, now that water will be sweeter or better or more healthy.
Mhm.
And if you have a pretty substantial um, group of people, all those thoughts of all those people together form a collective consciousness that has some power and effectiveness to it. So yes, it can, all of that works together. So it's the users, it's the marketers, it's the inventor, it's all of those who have positive intents. This works, I've seen it work, it works for me, it works for others, it'll work for you. And they have this intent, and they put it out there, and you get the intent, and it makes your intent more positive. Oh, my sister told me this worked for her, so it'll probably work for me. And you take it with a good intent, and it'll probably work because that's the placebo effect. So, for the most part, these things are effective in as much as people think that they are effective. They don't tend to work very well with skeptics. So if you get a bunch of skeptics that say, "All right, we're going to do some science here. I'm going to get the bottle of this magic water. I'm going to bottle of regular water. I'm going to bottle of tap water. I'm going to get a bottle of water out of the grocery store, and I'm going to put them all in exactly identical bottles, but I will have numbers on them that will tell me which one's which." And I'm going to have 1,000 people come up and test them all and decide which ones they like best and how they feel afterwards and how they feel a week after that, and do some real scientific, double-blind testing. If you do that, and if you do that without any of the inventors and marketers or anybody else even knows that it's going on, you just do that on your own at your own university, without making a big splash about what you're doing and what you're going to prove and that sort of thing. If you keep a low profile and just do the science, most of the time you'll find that there's no special effectiveness under those conditions. So then the skeptics come out and say, "Oh, look, this thing's all bogus. It doesn't do anything. Those people ought to be run out of business." But that's not a fact. The fact is, it's helped a lot of people feel better. The placebo effect is a real effect. People really do get better because they have an intention of getting better. They have a positive attitude toward getting better. And to use the placebo to actually help people get better or feel better or get more well, that's just good medicine. Like we say, the doctor with real good bedside manner, who talks to his patients, who cares about them, gives them a positive feeling that he's really considering and working on their problem and thinking about it and considering how to deal with it. Those doctors have a much higher percentage of patients that get well than do the doctors that treat each patient like a slab of meat that's just come across the conveyor belt, and they look at it and probe it and do a few things and make an announcement, hand them a drug, and next, they'll go on to the next one. Those doctors, statistically will show that their patients don't get as well as a doctor of good bedside manner. Placebo effect is a real effect. It's not a bogus effect. It changes people. It makes people healthier. So if somebody's going to put magic water out in the market and it helps people, I'm all in favor of that. There's no big problem, as long as it's all done honestly and upfront by people who really believe that the thing's going on. Because if it doesn't, if it's like, hey, you want to make some money? We can get water here out of my kitchen sink, and we'll label it, and we're going to sell it for $100 a gallon, and we're going to do all this, and we're going to pay for some marketing and so on, and the whole thing's bogus, and it's been bogus from the beginning. That doesn't help.
Then it wouldn't work so well.
It wouldn't work as well, because the people who created it already have a negative attitude attached to it. It's got that kind of ethic behind it at its root. Now, some people may read the advertising, pick it up, and the placebo effect will work for them. But the whole chain is made weaker because the very first links in it are rotten. They're not right. And those people are, laughing into their wallet, going, look at all this money we made, duping these silly people. And that vibe kind of goes out and becomes a negative thing in the culture in general. So, yeah, some people may be still helped by it, but it's not going to be as successful. It's like multi-level marketing. It'll fall apart more quickly. Okay, it may build and build up and build up for a while, but it tends to also crash. It doesn't have a lot of staying power to it.
Well, the problem that I had with this particular invention was that the science they claimed that is behind it didn't make too much sense. It still worked because all the other people, they were kind of okay with how they explained how it works, but it made me kind of a skeptic towards it, and this probably made it less efficient. But
made it less effective for you, right? Because you're a left-brain person, you want to see the logic, and if there isn't any logic, then you don't give it much credibility.
yeah.
But
well, I was thinking, well, it works, but not because how you explain it. Just works because of consciousness and the intent. But it still made me kind of annoyed that they put this kind of junk science behind it.
Well, the junk science is what they need and other people need to feel okay about it. The fact that you have more of a scientific background and you have more logical understanding of how things work, then that just doesn't work for you. But for the great mass of people, you can tell them most anything, and they're not very critical. They don't understand, basic physics or chemistry and things like that. So if it sounds, and people are enthusiastic about it, and there's some kind of logic that's put up there, even if the logic isn't logical or has big assumptions in it, most people don't notice that. But they need it. They need that story to convince them that it's real. Okay. If they just said, I get this water and I get my magic wand and I touch it with my magic wand and that makes the water magic, people will go, that's a lot of BS, and they'll walk away from it. But if they make up a good story about how the water molecules are changed and now, this happens and that happens and they dip crystals in it and they do this and that, and now, most people will find that credible. And because they'll find it credible, it will actually be helpful.
Okay. Thank you for that answer. I think it shed a light on how much complexity can be behind things like that, and how intent is not just one singular strand that's connected with an item, but it's like a complete machinery behind things.
It's everybody that's ever been associated with it. It's all that collective consciousness all together. And that's why things are also tend to be faddish, where you'll have something that'll work really, really well, and people will, it'll be a growing thing, and a lot of people will be into it. And then, 10 years later, it's like you can't even find it on the market. So things like that tend to be a little on the faddish side.
Hello, Tom. I hope you're doing well. And yes, my question is, I would like to know if you can help me with the conflicts that are currently taking place in this world, such as the Palestine and Israel war, where many, many innocent people are dying. And reading this news or being too much into it, like going to the demonstrations, brings a lot of negative emotions. But even if you try not to read about it and stay completely out of it, it can still make you feel guilty. And can you give us a tip on how to zoom out of this conflict and see it in a maybe positive light or in a different context, even if it's hard?
Yes, I can. This is an important question because it's not just the Israeli and the Palestine. There's a lot of negativity and dysfunction going on everywhere.
Yes.
At every level, even people who are our friends and neighbors. The corporations that are successful are often trying to squeeze every dime out of their customers. The banks will come up with fees that cost them absolutely nothing because their computer processes the problem, and it's not even touched by human hands. But that'll be a $50 fee, because of this thing happened, when they don't have any expense involved in it. It's just a way of fleecing the customer, with money without having to do anything for it. So that's going on all over, and it's called shrewd business. It's called being clever and being smart. It's not called lying, cheating, and stealing. It's acceptable in our culture. In our culture, we seem to put a prize on cleverness and feel that everybody else needs to be smart enough to take care of themselves. And if you're just not smart enough to take care of yourself and see that something's not good for you and you do it anyway, well, then that's kind of shame on you, that you haven't figured it out. So our culture kind of supports lying, cheating, and stealing in as much as it doesn't break any laws. And the laws are made by the people who want to lie, cheat, and steal without breaking any laws. So they adjust the laws to make sure that they can lie, cheat, and steal without getting crosswise with any laws. So, I mean, we don't have to look at the ugliness of the Palestinians and the Israelis, struggling with each other to see nastiness. Our whole culture is full of it. And that's because the average quality of consciousness in the world is low. It's very low. Okay, so that's the problem. Now, the problem has all kinds of symptoms, and the Israeli-Palestine is just right now probably the ugliest of these symptoms, going on right now. That's kind of drawn a lot of attention because it's uglier than the banks coming up with bogus fees. So we have an attention spread there. But the attitude toward these should all be the same, and that is, you shouldn't let this make you become negative. If you become angry at either side, it doesn't matter which side you're on. If you become angry and you're shaking your fist at those stupid people on the other side that are making it hard for the rest of us, you're part of the problem. You're just adding more angry to the mix that's in the world. That the angry vibe just goes up for a little bit from what you add to it. So that's not helpful, being angry. Now, if you can find something to do that is positive and constructive, and maybe that's demonstrating, maybe that's holding a sign up, maybe that's joining a group that does a sit-in or whatever else, trying to bring attention to it, but doing it positively, not out of anger, not out of hate, not out of fear, but because it's being helpful. So doing those kinds of things in a positive way are okay. They're fine. They're not only okay, but it's almost necessary, obligatory, when you see things that are really troubling, that you do something what you can do about them, whether it's sometimes just send money, is a helpful thing. But other times you want to get involved. You should. But not if it causes more negativity. That's not helpful. Being on the other side of the fence from the people that are against you and calling each other names just doesn't produce, a result that's useful. It makes everything worse. People on both sides dig in deeper because of being hollered at by the opposite side. So it polarizes. It doesn't unpolarize. It makes everything worse. So you have to be careful what you do and how you go about doing it. Talking about it, just talking to your friends, your family, people about it, that sort of thing. Sharing your ideas, as long as they're positive. When you run into somebody that doesn't want to hear what you have to say, or gets upset, then you walk away from that. You leave it alone. You don't try to argue them into submission, because that won't work. You'll just end up making them more resolute in their beliefs. It just won't work, because people are not arguing because they're being logical. They're arguing because they're being fearful. And fear is not rational. Arguing with someone who's not rational is a waste of time and energy. It just doesn't help, usually makes things worse. So the viewpoint you have to take is that everybody on this planet, all the humans, are exactly where they are in terms of their own consciousness evolution. Most of them are at pretty low quality. Most of them have a lot of fear. And that fear drives their choices. And that fear is completely irrational, but it drives their choices just the same. So that is just the way it is. It's the way we are. It'd be nice to wave a magic wand and have all that change, but it isn't. Now, how can it change? It can only change one person at a time. And that one person can only change himself. So now, yes, you might get up on a soapbox and make a speech, and maybe you change the mind of 10 or 20 people. Well, that might be good. Or you may also harden the attitudes of 10 or 20 adversaries. Well, that wouldn't be so good. So find ways that are positive, that have a net positive, that leave the world a little better place for you having done it. So getting up on the soapbox probably will cause as much trouble as it'll cause help. There may be other ways to approach it rather than demagoguery. So once you get to that point that everybody is where they need to be in order to take the next step to grow up, they can't take a giant leap. They have to take the next step. And you can then have some compassion for them. They're unhappy and they're miserable people. They're frightened people. They're full of fear. Their fear is making most all of their choices for them. And send them a little peace and a little, space in which to take a breath without so much fear. So be kind to everybody on both sides is the thing. Because everybody's doing the best they can with what they came in with. You come in with the level of quality you earned last time. And for most people, that's not very high. That's what they come in with. And they're pretty much struggling with what they came in with. But that struggle won't be aided by being angry with them or fussing at them or calling them names. If you can be kind to them and give them some space, maybe they'll see a bigger picture. Maybe not. But at least there's a possibility. So realize that nasty dictator, that terrible CEO that's taking advantage of people, that these are not the problems. These are symptoms of the problem. The problem is a low quality of consciousness that's kind of the average among humanity is so low. That's the problem. And until you solve that problem, the problem of the awful dictator and the bad government, they're just symptoms. And you can change them. You can pull that government apart and put in a different one, and it won't make that much difference in the long term, because if the people haven't changed, you're going to end up with the same thing again. It might take a generation or two, but it's all going to degenerate, because all of that is just a reflection of who we are, a very accurate reflection of who we are. And until we change, none of it's going to change. You know, look back at the history of the world, and you'll see that 200,000 years ago or so, Homo sapiens, maybe I shouldn't say human, there were a lot of other beings like Homo sapiens that were also vying with each other, but Homo sapiens, that we derived mostly our genetics from, they started walking around about 200,000 years ago, and up to about 500 or 600 years ago, almost nothing changed. Politics was about warlords, who had the most power. Law was about warlords, who could make up the rules. Economics was about warlords, who said who got how much money. It was all about control, power, force. The whole system was driven by control, power, and force. That was the human condition. So for most of that 200,000 years, that's just been the way it is. It hasn't changed much at all. The last 500 years, it's changed a lot. Where we are now today is a much better place than we were 500 years ago. 500 years ago, life was cheap. People saw nothing wrong with, just grabbing other people and enslaving them. They saw nothing wrong with taking, a 12-year-old child and chaining them to their machine to make sure they'd come back and, still be there in the morning. There's lots of things that were done within our culture and in our society that were not seen as bad things to do. They were seen as, well, that's just clever people at work, making things happen the way they want them to happen. So we've changed a lot in the last 500 years. So things are getting better. We are starting to learn our lessons. You just go even back 200 years, things are better in general than they were before that. So we're getting better, and that should be a little bit of solace to the mess that we see ourselves in the world, that we are outgrowing it. And as you outgrow it, you can expect lots of turmoil as things change. So now, our growing up as a people, as a species, it's changing, and changing even rapidly compared to what it had before, and that's going to cause a lot of turmoil. Those who are on the negative side are going to see that their game is losing, and that they're going to have to grab now and grab hard, because another 20 or 30 years from now, the grabbing is going to be impossible. So we see a lot of negative just blowing itself up as big as it can be, being as scary as it can be, and trying to take whatever advantage it can possibly grab before those advantages disappear. So that makes us look like everything's getting worse, but it's not. Everything's actually getting better. And those on the negative side of things are trying their best to slow that down, or stop it, or at least grab what they can grab before they can't just grab anymore. So in all of that, you can see a positive lining in that, a silver lining in that dark cloud. So take heart. Everything's not going to hell in a handbasket. We're all not marching, off a cliff. Things are getting better. There's a lot of struggles going on. Right now, there are probably 2 or 3 times as many people aware of consciousness, spirituality, right and wrong, good and bad, and what are these things, and do they matter, than there were just 20 years ago. geez, you can pick up look at the internet and see the words that are being most used, and consciousness is all over the place. We have lots of people talking about consciousness and consciousness effects, and we see a lot of that. 20 years ago, you'd never hear the word. It was still a word in our vocabulary, but it wasn't a very interesting word. Nobody talked about it. So things are changing. And yes, we'll have to put up with that kind of violence, that kind of fascism, that kind of control, power, force that we've been seeing for 200,000 years. We'll have to put up with some more of that, but it's not the future. That's the past. The future is rolling over that sort of thing. And though it's ugly as it can be, and it's destroying a lot of lives and people and property, and it's raising entropy hugely, it's limited in how long it can last and the effect that it's going to have. So that's just a few cheery notes. It's not all bad. It's not all just a terrible thing to take away. So be positive. Oppose the things you want to oppose, but oppose them positively, such that the net result at the end of the year is going to be that they've been more helpful than they've been hurtful. Have that in mind.
Yeah.
And then go do whatever your heart tells you that you need to do. If you can't stand on the sideline, well, find a way to help. Join the humanitarian aid movement. Join groups that are positive and peaceful and working on the same sides you're working on. Yeah, it's not a matter of don't get involved. We need to get involved. We grow up through our involvement. Just don't make it worse.
Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you really much. That makes sense. And I think that will help a lot of people. Thank you.
I just wanted to ask if you could speak a little bit, and I think you probably have spoken about this recently, but if you could tell us a little bit about the status of the experiments that you designed and which results they've shown so far, and where you see this going from here on, and what your hopes are for
okay,
for this.
That's a good question, because things have changed, and we're right in the middle of trying to clean all those changes up and get our graphics together so we can help tell a story that makes sense to people. But the first experiment was one where, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't get into the technical things. So the first experiment was where I just basically disagreed with the way that quantum physicists think the world works and why they think it works that way. And we finished that experiment, and it turned out to be just as I predicted it. So that's good news. That's a win. The physicists kind of made up a story to justify their own viewpoint, but the story requires some huge assumptions that don't really fly in the face of critical science. So anyway, I'll be doing a report on that soon. I'm going to be talking about it in the symposium that CUSAC, that's my organization that's funding these experiments. CUSAC's putting on a symposium that's going to be end of September, beginning of October, and in that we'll have explanations and diagrams and some tools that you can use to kind of understand what all the logical pieces are of that puzzle. But the good news is that it did indeed verify that my viewpoint was a good viewpoint. Unfortunately, the other physicists have not all laid down and confessed that they were wrong, but nobody really expected that. That's not what happens. So anyhow, that's good. So now the next experiment that we're going to do, I'm going to try for one of the more dramatic ones, where the experimenter actually is able to predict something that's impossible to predict. And that's going to turn out to be a little more expensive. This first one cost about $100,000 a piece. I had it done in 2 different universities because doing it in just one place is not very convincing to anybody. Well, yeah, they probably just made a mistake. If you get it done in 2 places, you have a lot more credibility that what you get is real. And eventually, once you've got 2 places, then it looks like it's probably real. And then you'll get 3 and 4 and 5 and 10 places as other people start to want to verify it themselves. So science is kind of slow that way, but I thought it would be a lot quicker if I started with 2 places. So I had 2 independent places doing the same experiment. The first one got answers some few weeks ago, and we're in the process of, like I say, pulling together and making up a formal report about that. The second university is real close. They haven't finished the experiment yet, but they're very close, and they're doing it in a way that I think is going to be even more easily described and discussed than the first one. So we're going to get some value out of both of them. But the second one hasn't actually finished yet, but is very close. We just had terrible problems with the manning of that one. We would get it almost done, and then the people who were doing it were like on postdocs, and the postdoc would end, and they'd go back, some other country, and so then we get new people, but the new people had this learning curve, and it took them a while to figure it out. And by the time they finally figured it out and got productive, their time was up. So we just constantly were running into this thing. It's more complicated than you can do, quickly. So we hired a person that works for us and works with the university, and now they're just doing great work. So they're pulling it all together, and they won't leave at the end of the semester. They won't get a 3-month vacation like the other people at .edu get. So this will be a lot better. So that's what's going on. Now the next experiment, just one piece of equipment we have to buy will cost like $150,000. Just one piece of equipment. We need a screen that will give us X, Y, and T of where any particle hits on the screen. So the screen needs to be at least probably 10, 15 centimeters in diameter, something like that would be big enough. But it has to be able to differentiate very, very precisely where a particle hits, at what time it hit there, and what's the X and Y, or Y and T, the 2 coordinates that will specify it in that plane. So such things exist, but they're very expensive, about $150K a piece. So we'll go on with that. I wanted to do something dramatic next, because that would not end up in an argument between me and other physicists. That either just works and it's dramatic as hell, and there's no way to slip out the back on that. It either does it or it doesn't. So I'm going to go for that next. So that's kind of an update on the experiment. So far, so good. Worked out as expected, and we're getting ready to move on to number 2. But we need to find some sources of money. So we're looking for those people in the world who have more money than they really know what to do with, and they'd also like to do something that would be of benefit to the world or to society or other people. They'd like to spend that money in a way that is profitable to the world. And those are not a small number of people. There are a lot of people who have excess money that would like to take that excess and do something valuable with it. So we're in a search for such people and trying to build up enough cash that we can start this new experiment again in 2 places. Now we'll probably just buy that one piece of equipment once and then share it between the 2, because it's so expensive. But we'll see. Depends on how much money we can collect, whether or not we can afford to get 2 of them. So that's where we are, Rudy. It's looking good.
That's very exciting. Okay, fingers crossed. And thank you for that, Tom. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hi, Tom. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Tom, I have one question in mind, or one thing that is boggling my mind right now. It's about limiting beliefs and the probability distribution in the PMR. So I've heard that, for example, that in China, there was a village where children were raised without any limiting beliefs. So they were told, oh, they can do everything what they want. And it's reported that they could move objects just by mind and doing amazing things. So, and I questioned myself, is it possible that the physical rule set in the PMR is just our limiting belief? And, or to turn, to put it into a different perspective, if we wouldn't have any limiting beliefs, would there be a PMR rule set at all? So, do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, I got that. Yeah. Yeah, there is going to be a PMR rule set because that's needed in order to create the virtual reality. Virtual reality has to have rules. You can't have everything being random. You need to have things that do things or don't do things for reasons. Well, that gives you continuity within the virtual reality. So you need a rule set in the virtual reality. Now, given that, how much leeway does a consciousness have in ignoring those rules or in not obeying them? Well, that's I don't know that I have the positive answer for that. Can you do anything you want? Just if you could get rid of all your beliefs, you could do a whole lot more than you can now. Yes, but no, I don't think you could do anything you want. The reason is that it would depend on how the society, say, of people who did not have any limiting beliefs, how that society actually was able to evolve and grow. What would be the dynamics of the choice making and the growing? If everybody could do anything, if you could use your mind to do anything you wanted to do, what would be the dynamics of that kind of life, and what sort of growth would there be? So you have to look at the basic reason, why is this virtual reality here? What's its purpose? What's it for? And it's a place for individuated units of consciousness to help them grow up by making important choices. So it would probably be that the important choice to make would be not to use those kinds of powers, because if everybody was thus empowered, what you would have would be chaos, unless everybody was also of a very high quality of consciousness. So I think that would matter a lot. So what this virtual reality would allow and not allow, I think, depends on how evolution is being affected by the choices that are being made. So yes, you can do many things if you don't have the beliefs. The belief is the main thing that gets in the way. I was in a course to learn. It was a course teaching people to see without their eyes. In other words, remote view in real time. And children were easy. If you had a 5-year-old, you could teach him in an hour. If you had a 7-year-old, you could teach him in a day. If you had a 20-year-old, you'd have to teach him in maybe 2 weeks. If you had a 40 or 50-year-old, you may need a month or two. It just took longer to back out of habits of thinking and beliefs. And that indeed was the whole structure of the course, was to get beyond the beliefs that keep you from being able to do that. And once you get beyond that belief, you find that reading without your eyes, which again is remote viewing in real time, is not all that hard to do, and most everybody can do it. It's not it no longer becomes a miracle. It becomes what most people can do if they didn't have the limiting beliefs. So that's true. But what does that do to this learning lab? And what does that do to the ability of people to grow up and become love? Because being able to manipulate things in the physical reality is not necessarily on the path of becoming love. So that would be the big question mark in here as to how the system would handle that. It might just say no more violation of the rule set. It has the ability to do that. After all, it's a virtual reality, and it can write in limitations if it wants to. So I don't know how that might work out, but that's the variable that you'd have to. That's kind of the unknown.
Couldn't you consider a limiting belief similar as a fear? So that you say basically it would make sense for the system to remove limiting beliefs, because then at the same point of time you would remove the fears.
Yeah, it's not exactly the same. You can have a limiting belief that you can't see without your eyes. If you don't have your eyes, you won't be able to see. That's not so much a fear as it is just a belief. You take that fear away, the person doesn't become more love. They just become more able to see things, whether there's any lights on or not. So it's not really the same as a fear. Similar in some ways, and many beliefs are fear related. Indeed, probably most of them are, but not all of them. So I don't know really to answer your question. I'm not sure what the LCS would do in that situation, but you can have powers to do miracles, and if you had a poor quality of consciousness, that would be a bad thing.
Okay, yeah. So, but if you would remove all limiting beliefs, theoretically, if you would remove all limiting beliefs, you would be in a non-physical world, basically. Yeah. So, and couldn't it be then that the limiting beliefs or the beliefs at all are just the rule set of the PMR? That everything is inside you. So the rule set is just inside yourself.
Well, the rule set is part of, the rule set is also embedded in the data stream that you receive from the LCS. You get a data stream from the LCS that defines your reality. And that data stream can have in it what the LCS wants to have in it, and that will be your reality.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Interesting question. So thank you very much.
Yeah, very interesting question.
You wrote in your book that there was a time where you needed 2 to 3 hours of sleep per night for several years while you were exploring NPMR or different states of consciousness. So was this a result of training in other states of consciousness, or were there other causes? I fall asleep almost every other time during meditation, even with normal sleep behavior. It's not my question, it's the question I read.
Yeah. I think I was getting energized while I was in the altered states. So though I was not in this reality, I was doing things in other realities, I would come back and be energized by those experiences. So that even though I only got 3 hours worth of sleep, I seemed to get enough rest or replenishment that I could function then the next day. Now, I was functioning different than most people. I was spending about 20 hours a week with Bob Monroe, and then when I would come home, I'd spend almost, at least half that amount of time again, just practicing on my own. I had a wife, I had children, I had a job. So that's an awful lot of, that's an awful lot of stuff to do when you're limited to a 24-hour day. And the only way I was able to do that was that a lot of the things I was doing in the non-physical. By the time I came back to the physical body, the body was refreshed. It had been lying there in a kind of a comatose state, unmoving, long enough that it could regenerate most of the things that it needed to regenerate, even though the mind was active. So that would be my only way to explain that. But I would focus intensely on things, and the rest of the world would drop away. So let's say when I was with my family, I was focused on my family, and other concerns, things that I were doing elsewhere, things that were non-physical, things at work would all just drop away. And the only thing that would be in my reality would be my family. Or at work, when I was at work trying to solve problems for, the place where I worked, I would be focused on those entirely. And I really wouldn't know much that was going on in my environment while focused. Now, I was very productive during those times. I did a lot of very productive work at work. The people who were paying me to come in and spend my time there, I did a lot of very productive work for them that I don't think it could have been any better had I been getting 10 hours of sleep a night. But I did it in a very focused way. As I was working, I was not particularly aware of my environment. I was just really deep in concentration with what I was doing. So that was a little unusual. So I'd be very focused on, my work life. I'd be very focused on the home life, very focused on what I was doing in Monroe, and I just wasn't sleeping very much. But I seemed to be able to get by with that for a long period of time. Occasionally, it would get confusing. You'd come out of one of those deep focuses and you wouldn't know exactly where you were. And I made a little joke about that in the book. If this is Tuesday, then it must be, I must be, at work. That it took a while sometimes coming out of that deep space of concentration and kind of looking around thinking, oh, what day is this? What week is this? Where am I? And you'd get a few cues from the surroundings and it would all kind of flow back in and I'd find myself. But that was a very unusual time. So that was not typical me or typical anybody else. That was just what I was going through when I had this very intense learning process in the non-physical, and that lasted for several years. I just needed more than 24 hours in a day. I needed about 40 hours in a day, so that's how the system was able to give me 40 hours in a day. It just I just focused intently on each thing.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Okay, the next question I have here is, what do you think is behind the UFO phenomenon? Are these weather phenomena or human flying objects? Do UFOs and aliens come from other planets in our PMR simulation and travel to us according to the possibilities of the PMR rule set? Or are these beings from NPMR that temporarily linked into our PMR simulation? Or are the UFOs perhaps targeted simulations by the LCS? If so, for what purpose?
Okay, good question. I can answer this on several different levels. In general, I think the UFO phenomena, and that is the sightings and people seeing all manner of things that don't seem to make good physical sense. They violate physical rules. I think most of these things are just events, experiences that the LCS gives people. In other words, your reality is created by you receiving a data stream from the LCS. The LCS is a server of this game. You're a player. You get a data stream, and that data stream defines this reality. And if the LCS wants to put a couple of ETs in there that land in your yard and burn the grass and leave divots where the lander things hit the ground, and the little green people with pointy ears, come into your house and you have dinner with them and you take pictures and then they fly away and you're left with burnt grass and divots and memory. That's not hard to create that in a virtual reality. Matter of fact, that's trivial to create in a virtual reality. You just put that data stream in the minds of those people that you want to experience that. That data is just there. That makes their reality. Okay, there is no one reality out there that we all live in. It's not the way it works. Everyone lives in their own reality. It's a multiplayer game, so there's a lot of things we agree on. A lot of interactions we can agree on. But basically, you get a data stream and you make it your own when you interpret that data to be your reality. You interpret that data in terms of your fear, in terms of your knowledge, in terms of your experience. And your interpretation is the reality that you find. That defines it. So it's real easy to create an ET experience. For the LCS, it just puts some ET experience data into your data stream. Now, why would it do that? It's doing that because the pace of potential growth here is quickening. Like I said when I talked about the how do you live in such a control, power, and force space, and how do you do that positively? Okay, well, one of the things that's going to help us get out of that control, power, force paradigm is getting a bigger picture, prying our minds open to see something more than just this physical reality. Some of the ways that people's minds are pried open is through paranormal things. Paranormal stuff happens to them. They get they have a dream that is precognitive and it comes true exactly to the detail. They have remote viewing. They have mind-to-mind communication. They talk to their dead relatives. All of these personal side experiences open the door of your mind just a crack more by having them. It makes you realize that the world is more complex and not so buttoned down as what the scientist would tell you. So it's just a mind opener. That's why we have things like crop circles. It's not that aliens sneak in and give us pretty pictures in our crops for some unknown reason. I think the LCS just essentially creates that in the data stream so that it'll open our minds, because it's something that is not possible. Something happens overnight in the dark over a 24-hour period, and it would take a team of probably 20 surveyors a week to lay out all the what gets bent and what doesn't, to make those precise diagrams and pictures that they get. So it's not something that can take place overnight in the dark. That's just too hard to do. So we don't know how that could possibly be done by humans, so we jump to the conclusion then it must be done by aliens. So I think a lot of the alien conjecture is simply just the larger consciousness system trying to open our minds. Now, what about the idea that there are other people, some even if not like us, that live out there in this big universe? Well, most scientists think that's probably a very rational idea, and they come from the point of view that with the number of suns that they can see, and in the many trillions, and the number that they probably can't see because they can only see so far, that the probability that there would be other places in this universe, sort of like our solar system, that produces life, is pretty high. Even if it's 1 in a trillion, well, 1 in a trillion happens a lot over, 5 billion years, 5.5 billion years. So most scientists would say that there's a good probability that there is other life out there in the universe besides us. But that's from the viewpoint of materialism. Materialism sees the whole universe as existing all at the same time. In a virtual reality, the virtual reality only exists in the minds of the players. We don't have a whole reality out there with all these suns and things creating planets or whatever. We only have players, and those players will get only the data they need based on what they're looking at and what's going on around them in the multiplayer game. That's all they get. Okay, so it boils down to the system. How many seats do they need in the game? So if you're the larger conscious system and you have lots of individuated units of consciousness playing avatars, where's the sweet spot? In other words, if you add one more IUOC playing one more avatar, does that make the whole system more effective? Or is the cost of that, which is the cost of running that data stream, calculating all the interactions between that entity and all, and any other entities that are interacted with that, that's the cost. Is the cost worth more, or is cost more than the benefit, which is one more IUOC making choices in the system? Well, I think if you have any knowledge of systems, you realize that all systems kind of have a sweet point. There's a point, they scale only but so far. When you scale them up and scale them up, you eventually run into the purpose of why they exist in the first place. And if you exceed that purpose, then you start getting into limitations. So somewhere along the line, the larger conscious system will say, I don't need any more seats. I got as many seats as is profitable. Any more seats after this costs more than the benefit of having another seat. Well, so how many seats do you think the LCS needs in this experiment of consciousness evolution going on here in our little corner of the universe? What does it have? About 9 billion now? So it's got 9 billion seats. Does 9 billion in one give it an advantage worth the cost? I would say probably not. So what does that mean? That would mean that it's got all the seats it needs right here in this particular virtual reality. So what about all those suns and things out there? They're nothing more than what the LCS puts in the data stream, just lights in the sky. And a light in the sky, it just takes a bit or two, and only a small percentage of the people are actually looking at those lights at the sky at any one time. And an astronomer pulls up his big telescope and he looks out there, and a probability distribution from the possibilities is drawn, and that's what he sees.
As I understand it, I'm not an expert, but there is a disclosure movement in the US going on right now with people coming forward and telling about witness data of UFOs, and there is radar evidence of UFOs. Do you know anything about that, and why would the LCS kind of give so many data to make such a movement possible, or do you think there's something else behind this movement?
Well, I think what's mostly behind it is the LCS is just trying to crack open minds to larger possibilities. And I don't, there's been the rumor is it that disclosure is going to happen in the next few months. I've heard that for at least 30 years. And it never actually comes to that. There's all sorts of meetings and people get together and documents are written and pledges are made, and sometimes the government will stand up an organization to investigate and sometimes not, and yada yada yada, and when it's all done and said, there's no particular disclosure made by anybody. So I don't know whether present trends will continue or whether something will come out of that, but I wouldn't hold my breath. I'd stay skeptical that it's just going to be a lot of humma, and nothing much is going to happen. So that would be my guess, but no, I don't know. How far is the system wants to go to crack open minds? What might they say, and how beneficial is that? So, but anyway, where I was going with it is in a model that is a virtual reality that is computed in consciousness, there is no waste of all these thousands of suns, trillions of suns. There is no waste because none of those are rendered. The only thing that's rendered is data that somebody needs. So what's rendered is just what the players here want, what they need, what they look at, and only for the time they look at it. Nothing else is rendered. So just like any virtual reality, you'd look at this and you'd say, well, if the number of seats is already plenty, then why would the system populate any more of this universe other than just this one solar system? It's got all the seats it needs out of this particular virtual reality. Now there may be other there are other virtual realities around that also have populated places. I've been to them, I've interacted with them, so I know there are other virtual realities. And this virtual reality may just be for us, and that's all. And it wastes nothing, and it's very, very efficient. So that's also a possibility. That's a strong answer to the Fermi Paradox. If you look up Fermi Paradox, you'll see that was scientists got together and did some calculations and came up with the question is, where are they? If we're in a younger part of the universe, there's an older part of the universe that's been around for 1 billion years or so, longer than us. So they should be, if they evolve like we did, they should be about 1 billion years ahead of us. Well, if they were 1 billion years ahead of us, even at less than light speed, they would eventually, have more numbers than they had room, and it would expand and expand, and even making short hops to the next place. They should have been through here a long, long, long time ago. So the question is, where are they? So that's a very strong logical paradox, and the fact that, well, they don't exist, that's why they're not here, because this is a virtual reality. That's a very strong logical answer to that Fermi paradox. The fact that this is a virtual reality computed in consciousness says that it's possible that we're it, and that's not an inefficient process at all. It's very efficient. So that's my take on ETs. Mostly, I think they're opening people's minds. I don't really expect it to go anywhere. It's been on the edge of going somewhere for almost as long as I can remember, and hasn't made it yet. I don't know that this will be any different, but it does open minds. Like paranormal things open minds. It's just another game I think the LCS plays. And are these people who report these things actually reporting real things that they saw and heard? Yeah, well, of course, it was in their data stream. But then you can't jump to the conclusion that they're from, the Pleiades system, and that they're here to, eat us for lunch or to show us a better way, or all the rest of that then just becomes conjecture.
Thank you. I have another question related to the data stream. How do you explain illnesses such as schizophrenia and delusions? And where does the data come from that these people can hear? What kind of voices do the affected people hear? Where do they come from?
Okay, now there's not just one simple answer to that, because there's at least two. Well, there's multiple sources and possibilities. One is that it can be organic. In other words, it can be a biochemistry problem. So that would make it a rule set issue. And the reason things happen is that really almost anything that can happen does happen. So when when that egg and sperm get together and chromosomes are shared and some are expressed and some are not, there's so many possibilities, and each of those possibilities have probabilities, and just the way any particular human comes out has a very large random component to it. They just come out the way they come out after all the possibilities are mixed up in that soup. So sometimes people come out with dysfunctional bodies and minds. They come out with dysfunctional central nervous systems, let's put it that way. And that's just the way it is. So 1 in 100,000 or 1 in a million or whatever it is just turns out that way. So some of it may be physical, biochemistry. Now, there's this place where the two mix. Other situations may be entirely mental. Okay, the people may be hearing things from another reality frame. They may be connected to some other individuals, people, stories. They may be getting data out of databases. They may have other kinds of things that are creating this information that they get. And you have a possibility of getting information from 3 sources. 1 is the LCS, 2 is other IUOCs, and 3 is yourself. You are also a piece of consciousness, so you can create information just like the LCS and other IUOCs. There's no tags on the source. The information from any of those 3 sources looks identical. So you can't tell what the source of the information is. It's impossible to tell for sure. Now, with experience, you can learn to differentiate to a large degree, but you're never certain. So sometimes a schizophrenic might say, oh, I'm probably hallucinating this. You know, is there really a little green man in front of me talking to me? And he might ask somebody else that he trusts, and they'll tell him, you know, yes or no, there really is, or no, there really isn't. Or am I a soldier now in World War I, you know, hiding in a trench? And he may ask somebody and they'll say yes or no. So sometimes there's an awareness of the fact that the information is unknown. And it may or may not make sense. Other times there is no awareness of that, and people just get information, and that information does define their reality. What they get in their data stream defines their reality. So if their reality has voices that talk to them in it, well, there's voices there that talk to them. Now, that could come from another IUOC, the LCS, or it could come from themselves. They may be creating it. Or it could be just in a defective central nervous system. That part of the nervous system that deals with voice may be jabbering things. The jabbering may not just be random, it may be some sort of rant that has to do with their fears. So, in any case, it's a mixture of organic and not. Now, there's a connection between those. Those two aren't just separate things. That you've got the organic rule set stuff, and then you've got the consciousness stuff. They interact with each other. Mind leads, body follows. So, if you are, let's say, a negative person, and this is all within your consciousness, you think negative thoughts a lot, you tend to be self-centered, etc., you may modify your central nervous system in order to support that kind of mental state. In other words, you may stop making enough serotonin, say, in your central nervous system. Your serotonin production may just reduce because that helps you then maintain this negative state. Mind leads, body follows. Mind stays in a negative state, the body will modify to support that state. So the body stops making serotonin. Well, and it just reduces it. So now you have to take Prozac or some other pill to give you additional serotonin, and you're classified as depressed. Okay, but it all started just with mind. It didn't have an organic root, but now it has organic, roots now. You've created the organic roots. Okay, so that works that way sometimes. Now, also, you can have somebody who is interacting very maybe even effectively with guides or with other entities that are giving them information or telling them things. And instead of them keeping it to themselves, they tell their friends, they tell their parents, they tell their doctor. And pretty soon they're talking to a psychiatrist. Pretty soon that psychiatrist starts giving them meds that's messing with their mind, and pretty soon they're in an institution for the mentally ill. And there was nothing wrong other than the fact that they shared. They could have gone on with a lifetime and never had a single problem, except they shared. If everybody's telling you that that's the way you are, that this is a problem you have, and that this medication is helping and so on, you believe that. You don't believe it's a grand conspiracy to trap you in a hospital. I mean, it doesn't have really a point to that, because the people who are trapping you in that hospital with this grand conspiracy, they all think they're doing it for your benefit because there's something wrong with you. You hear voices and they want to fix that. They want to make you like everybody else. So it's a shared thing. The physical environment can mess up the mental side. The mental side can mess up the physical, the physical body. The two of them can affect each other. So then it gets to be such a mess that it's really hard to unravel it. It's really, really difficult to peel it back and find out what's going on and why that's going on. So unfortunately, our mental health services tend to create a lot of problems where there really is no problem, except somebody who's just not like everybody else. We've got this problem in our culture that says if somebody's not just like us, it's a problem and we need to fix that. That's an intolerance of diversity. Rather than saying, well, this person's kind of strange, I wonder what sort of talents they might have or what they might offer the world, or so let's take care of them and see where it might go. See who this is they're talking to. Let's talk with them. Let's make friends with it. Let's deal with it positively, rather than it's not like us, therefore it's wrong and it must be fixed. There's a lot of things that aren't like us. We need to embrace diversity. When people aren't like us, rather than defining them as ill because they're not like us, we need to see if we can't find value in them, ways that they can contribute, rather than just make everybody fit, every peg has to fit the same hole. So that's a problem that we as a culture have. Our definition of bad health is not like us. That's why we have a Freudian model that says an ego is absolutely necessary. It's a good thing. Everybody needs an ego. That ego is important to our well-being. It's a sense of who we are and why we are. It's what gives us gumption, what keeps us from being a doormat and other people pushing us around. That ego is essential because everybody has an ego. So everybody, it's just like us. Therefore, it must be healthy, must be good, because everybody has one. So we, the people who define ourselves as healthy, then define the ego as a healthy thing because we all have it. So we define things that are unhealthy as healthy, define things that are, that are perhaps healthy as unhealthy, and that's an intolerance for diversity. So that's mental illness gets to be I hope I made that point. It gets to be such a convoluted problem that you don't know what has caused what, which has caused what, and it gets to be, was it a perfectly harmless connection these people were having that should have been, that should have made them special in their own way of making this connection, or was it something organic? That part of their brain that makes up speech is just gibbering on about something, wrapping itself around a fear. Well, we don't take the time to find out. We just say, well, they're not like us. Put them in an institution. where we keep people that are different. So it's those, the point is it's too hard to untangle. Our society makes a mess of whatever it is we naturally have. It tends to take it and make it a lot more difficult to deal with. And it makes it very difficult. So you'll find mixtures of things. If you can find the people early, before they've been labeled and institutionalized, then there's something maybe you can do about it. You can find out what, or you can help them. What kind of voices, what are they saying? What's their point? Where are they coming from? Are they saying good things or bad things? Why are they saying that? What are their names? Where do they come from? Ask them questions, find out. See what it means. See what maybe we can use these people for. In ancient societies, people who were strange were often given jobs like shaman or other such positions, within a tribe or a group of people. We just say, oh, they're different. That makes them wrong.
Thank you for that answer, and thank you very much for having us and spending the time with us and giving such a wonderful interview. I think we all can profit from this, and I hope also the viewers at home who see this on YouTube can profit from this. So another great round of applause for you, Tom, please.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here. I wish Oliver was still here to be sharing all of this with us. He was a great person, and I would like us not to forget what he started and what he gave us, and the open-minded skepticism of Oliver needs to continue on. And I appreciate you folks doing that, keeping it all together, and I'm pleased to meet with you and give you some time and answer some questions. Oliver and I did that every so often. It wasn't that often, but when I happened to be in Germany or he happened to be here, or sometimes even we just over a Zoom, we'd just sit and talk. It happened maybe once or twice a year, but over the years it collected a little portfolio of talks with Tom. So I've always enjoyed those encounters, and I enjoy this one as much. I'm glad to be here. So thank you for keeping it going and keeping me in the picture.
Thank you, Tom. We hope that Oliver would approve of what we're doing right now. He did such a tremendous job, and we are still trying to figure out how we as a group of people can accomplish what he did. But yeah, it was tremendous what he did.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much. I appreciate it, and hopefully I said something that you and others that are listening, and those who over the next 10 years will listen to it when it goes out on the YouTube. There's going to be a lot of people can listen. Hopefully our conversation has offered some insights or some different ways of looking at things that we will find valuable. That's the point. Information is great. Shared information is much better. So that's the point. Not just keep it to yourself, but share it, which is what you do when you put it out on YouTube. Then you'll be sharing it with the larger audience, and that's a very good thing to be doing.